Hello. Conflicts occur when something we care about gets threatened. And because they occur when something we care about gets threatened, then that triggers a threat response that's built into us as human beings. And we know from looking at the emotional intelligence literature that the threat response triggers automatic chemical reactions in us. So, one of the things that we want to be careful of and we want to be aware of in dealing with conflict situations is not to let that threat response trigger an escalation of conflict, making matters worse for ourselves and our conflict partners. So, we want to make sure, especially in the initial phases of the conflict, that we do things that make it possible to try to keep escalation to a minimum. So I think what we want to do today is to talk about escalation and the different stages of escalation. The different stages are the different severities of escalation that can happen in conflict situations. Now, these stages might happen in sequence, but they don't have to. But they don't have to because we could begin conflict at a higher stage of escalation than the stage one of escalation. So I want you to think of the stages of escalation as degrees of escalation rather than sequences that the escalation might progress through. It could progress through them, but it may not. It may start not at stage one, but at stage three or even stage four. So I think it's important to bear that in mind. So, very quickly, what is escalation? Conflict escalation is an increase in the intensity of emotion. The longer it goes on that we do not get what we care about addressed in a satisfactory manner, the more frustrated we become, and the more likely that frustration is going to lead to a higher intensity of both frustration and then maybe anger. A second element of escalation is rather than being focused on the single incident that triggered the conflict episode in the first place, as we begin talking about the conflict with our conflict partner, the issue expands. And now we don't talk about the one instance that happened, but now we refer to, or they refer to, past histories, what other people have said, etc. So now the conflict becomes more difficult to understand because we've begun to dump other things into it. And so rather than staying focused on the conflict issue, the issue expands. That's a second element of conflict escalation. And the third element of conflict escalation, which is what we want to talk about now, is the increasing tactics that we think we can use to pressure the other person into accepting our resolution of the conflict. So those are the three elements of conflict escalation: increased in the intensity of emotion, the broadening of the scope of the conflict issues, and then finally, increased tactics of pressure to get the other person to relent. All right, so let's look at each of these elements of the stages of escalation. Stage one. Stage one is, let's assume you and I are in conflict over some particular issue. And stage one of the conflict is how it begins. We talk about it. You say what you think, I say what I think. I try to persuade you to see it from my perspective. You try to persuade me to see it from your perspective. That argument could be heated. It could be one that goes on for multiple episodes. So we may talk about it today. We don't get a resolution on it. We might talk about it tomorrow. We might talk about it the next day. So long as you and I are engaged in a conversation, maybe even a debate about whose solution, who's right, who's wrong, which is the best way to proceed, so long as we're staying focused on that issue and we keep it on that, even if we get a little excited about it, we're at stage one. So the mark of stage one is the focus on the issue and the willingness of both parties to stay engaged with each other to try and solve it as a pair. That's stage one. Many of our conflicts remain at stage 1. However, an advanced stage of conflict escalation is when I no longer believe, or you no longer believe, but I no longer believe, that dealing with you in a straightforward manner is getting me anywhere. So I now decide, rather than dealing with you in a straightforward manner, I now try to manipulate you or trick you or maneuver you using various kinds of subterfuges to get you to agree with me and for you to relent on what you think we should do. I'm still engaged in conversation with you. I still think there's a possibility that we could reach some agreement, but no longer do I believe it can be done in a straightforward manner on the merits of the issue itself. I now think I have to maneuver or trick you into agreeing to what I think is the best solution. That's stage 2. Sometimes people say, and I think this is a mark of stage 2, oh, I have to get them to believe it was their idea, which is a form of manipulation. And if I'm trying to do that, I'm at a higher level of conflict than I was if I was dealing with the other person in a straightforward manner. All right. So what's stage 3? Stage 3, or this higher level of escalation, when I decide that it's useless to talk to you. I'm going to abandon you as my conflict partner, and I'm going to seek to get my solutions implemented without you. Generally, this happens in 2 ways. The first and most common way is for people who are in superior positions of authority, i.e. your boss, simply tells you, I don't care what you think on this, you will do it my way. So there's no conversation here anymore. We're not partners. The boss has simply said, we're going to do it my way. So his actions are now going to indicate what's going to happen, not a conversation between the two of us. That's the most common way that this happens. And it is an escalation of the conflict because what you want no longer matters. And what your concerns and cares are not going to be addressed. So that's an escalation. The other way that it happens, very common at work, is for me to go over your head or behind your back, whatever metaphor you'd like to use. Often, I'm going to go to your boss, and I'm going to tell your boss that you're not very, very cooperative, I don't know what to do anymore, and I need your boss to make you do what I want done. This is another common thing that happens in many organizations, and it's an escalation of the conflict. In stage 3, the conflict is escalating because we are no longer dealing with the issue. But the focus of our attention is on the conflict dance partner and making them essentially irrelevant in the resolution of the conflict. And this has a very destructive effect on the relationship between you and your conflict partner. And I would suggest it's to be avoided at all costs. The 4th stage of conflict escalation, or the 4th level of conflict escalation, if you'd like to think about it in those terms, is for me to now attack you in ways that I can deny that I'm attacking you. So I now begin talking about you to others. I begin to express some concerns that you're not a very helpful person. Hey, have you also had problems with them? Oh, I thought you did. So I now attack you, but I attack you in ways that I can deny that I'm attacking you. I have plausible deniability. So in a meeting, I might say something about you, and then when in an attacking way, and then when you react to that, I talk about how overly sensitive you are, that I was just joking, etc., etc. So the 4th stage is for me to try and maneuver others to see you in a negative light, but in a way that doesn't reflect on me. I've seen this happen many times. I might confess that I've done it a couple of times myself in my past before I knew that was a bad thing to do, because I thought it was an effective way to put pressure on the other person to do what I wanted them to do. That's stage 4. A higher stage of escalation moves beyond identifying you as not very smart or lazy or not a team player or not committed to the mission or not very smart about what we need to do. And now, rather, I move to saying you're a bad person, that there's something fundamentally wrong with you as a person. And I begin spreading this as far and wide as I can. And so no longer are you simply the incompetent a person that ignores teamwork and those kinds of things. Now there's something fundamentally bad about you. And that's a significant increase in the intensity of the conflict. And I try to get others to agree to that. And now, once that happens, and once we're at that stage, the next several stages are attempts to get you expelled from the organization. I don't need to go into all of those in order for you to understand the escalation, but stages 6, 7, and 8 are all about trying to get you out of the organization, to try to get you fired, various forms of shunning, various forms of ostracizing, marginalizing, pushing you out, making it so uncomfortable you want to leave, or outright get you fired. So those are the stages of conflict escalation. Let me summarize. The first level of escalation is you and I together are arguing back and forth to try and convince each other of the merits of our position rather than the other person's position. This can be heated, it can go on for a long time, but so long as we're in conflict with each other and we're in conversation with each other, and so long as we stay focused on the issue and deal with the issue in a straightforward manner, that's level 1. Stage 2, or level 2, is when I no longer believe that dealing with you in a straightforward manner is going to work, and I try to maneuver, trick you, manipulate you, fool you into accepting a solution very close to what I want. In stage 3, I abandon you as a conflict partner and try to get my way through other means than in conversation with you. Stage 4, I begin to attack you as a person, but in ways that I can say, I wasn't doing that, I don't know what's going on, but I'm undermining you as not very smart, I'm undermining you as not a team player, I'm undermining you as not being committed to the mission, in whatever way I can to others, and I'm trying to get allies on my side. Stage 5, I've moved beyond that, and now I'm trying to convince other people that you're essentially a bad person, and you have no redeeming qualities, and we need to find a way to expel you from the organization, force you out, make it so uncomfortable you have to leave, or get you fired. And then the stages at 6, 7, and 8 are increasing attempts to make that happen. As you can see, the further we move away from the issue, the conflict issue, which is what both parties care about, the escalation moves more and more to focusing not on the issue, but on the other person. And that's a form of the escalation. So let's bear that in mind as we begin to understand the conflict and the conflict dynamic, and to see how important it is that we don't allow that to happen, either through our ignorance of what we're doing, which happens sometimes, or we don't allow it to happen because it's on our mind and we're consciously taking efforts and making efforts and doing things that keep that from happening on either my side or your side. And that's what we're going to try to do when we first talk about the conflict episode. Thanks. I hope this was helpful. You know where to find me if you have any questions.